Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Dru Krupinsky. Dru is the senior manager in procurement at Gilead Sciences. More specifically, he's focused on supplier risk and sustainability, topics that all companies are increasingly focused on today. So, hi, Dru. Thank you so much for being with me.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me.
So I talked a little bit about your current role and broad areas of your focus, but bring us up to speed for people who maybe don't know you. What can you share with us about your professional journey to this point?
Well, I like to start by saying that when I was a kid, everyone has your dream job. And I used to tell people that I wanted to save the earth. I was a little bit of a wild outdoorsy kid. And my first job out of high school was teaching outdoor education to kids and running these ropes courses, these challenge courses that are about, challenging yourself and getting outside of your comfortable envelope. Quickly realized the kids get it. The kids don't need environmental education. It's really around how we build our cities and our societies, what we prioritize. So my degree is in energy management design, which is like quantitative methods in environmental studies, electricity theory and stuff like that, and city and regional planning. So my first job out of college was Marin County Sustainability Planning Department. This is a long time ago when we were still trying to figure out how to count the carbons. When you say you're going to do a greenhouse gas inventory, do you count the cars that are driving by the freeway? How does a municipality calculate this stuff from their fleet or their electricity purchases? And then from there, I got a job with a multinational where the guy who trained me did a great job, and then he left a few months in. 8 months later, I was sort of in charge of the North America market and doing things like joint implementation, like Kyoto Protocol stuff, a lot of like CDP work, and just global inventory, carbon sourcing, net neutral certifications, carbon footprinting, and stuff like that. I stayed in that market for quite a long time, was with a company called Cameron Cole for over a decade, and then recently transitioned to Gilead. It's a due diligence position, so this is procurement. And broadly, as we as a company go through our due diligence, it's not just about assessing the suppliers before they come into your ecosystem. How do you continually manage the supplier across a large multinational complex enterprise where there's different operating units with different risk dimensions, and as always, competing priorities. What gets prioritized in a discussion with a supplier? How do we enable our stakeholders within the company to be fluent enough in these areas to have meaningful conversations? And then risk is deeply tied with these activities, because as some of our reporting obligations overseas continue to increase just the depth and breadth of what they're asking us about how we manage our supply chain, there's a level of managed risk exposure that's becoming equally important to doing the right thing. Is you also have to demonstrate to third parties that you've objectively implemented some of the due diligence policies, procedures, activities that are required across the world. Like the FDA permits you to sell drugs. There's a contract for this.
Right.
Well, in Europe, they tend to put different things in the contracts. So keeping all of that afloat at the same time is really where I'm at now. I'm, trying to not just give a list of recommendations to a company like Gilead and then walk away, but actually continue to sit here and really try to fundamentally shift our company's approaches.
It's interesting because when you were talking about working the ropes course with the kids, you kind of made the comment that like the kids get it. And it's interesting because I do think, depending on what the specific target or objective is, I do think at times you can work with organizations that get it.
And you've had experience on the public sector side, you've had experience on the private sector side. Is there anything broadly that you would observe as sort of an indication that an organization gets it? I know this is terrible practice for podcasts, but I'm doing air quotes, gets it. So like, did they truly understand and have internalized this thing that you're working towards?
I would say that the number one indicator of a company that is actually doing these things is where the highest level of tailwinds is coming from. There's certain companies across the globe, certainly in our sector as well, where it's a priority at a very high level, where some of their big wheels are continuing to discuss and push these as important topics. That's probably the number one thing I would look to externally. But the reality is that these are large, complex, multinational corporations, and there are everywhere. There's going to be pockets of excellence, pockets of sort of neutrality, and then some resistance. To bring it back to the ropes course analogy, though, I always think there was two types of kids that would show up at the ropes course, right? So some of these are relatively high events. You're 30, 40 feet in the air. And some you have to walk out on a plank or let go to grab the next rung, which I still use in business now. Like, you have to let go of the ladder for a second if you're going to reach up and grab higher. But the thing about the kids that sort of plays into business too is you have to be able to read your audience. So some of these kids, when you start to unpack with a story about how we all are very good at building comfortable furniture and living in a room, and you have to go outside sometimes, some of the kids are very open to that. Some humans are very open to that discussion of, like, let me look at myself, and yes, you're challenging this. Like, I'm open to that. Let's have this conversation. Some of them, though, they're like holding on. You say, hey, come on, you can do it. Let go and reach higher. And they're like, I'm coming down. You're like, no. And they interrupt you and stop you. Like, don't talk. Like, I hope you're ready, because I'm not engaging. I'm just letting go right now. And I want to make sure you're holding your end of the rope.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because the analogy holds even when we look at procurement teams that maybe don't yet have programs that are focused in a centralized way on supplier risk and sustainability. I say a centralized way because I think it's easy to look at a situation and say, wow, risk, my goodness, that's part of everyone's job. Or sustainability, that's part of everyone's job. But there's a funny thing about something that's everybody's job. It's also kind of nobody's job all at the same time. And so getting these centralized formal programs started is a little bit like letting go of that one rope to be able to grab the other. What advice would you have for a centralized procurement team that maybe has not yet centralized their work or ownership or accountability around risk and sustainability?
Well, first, ask somebody who's a better expert than me. I'm still trying to figure all of these things out. So certainly go talk to experts, because this is really hard. I think more broadly, though, my advice is start with what you have. Every company that I've talked to as a consultant or as a hired auditor, or now that I'm within Gilead, there's stuff there, right? We're not building from nothing. A lot of times we're trying to enhance programs or just make it better by not cutting things out. So for example, if you're trying to streamline onboarding or whatever, don't streamline it by removing questions, for example, which is still a good idea to have nice tight questions if you do need a questionnaire as part of your onboarding. But instead of removing questions, I think what you really need to focus on is how to award the red, yellow, and green flags, right? So how do you do that efficiently across the enterprise? And the classic example in-house right now is that when it comes to things like human rights due diligence, one of our areas that we're working on right now is called deviation management. So you found some issue, some supplier is out of expectation, and it's maybe there's an actual issue that's getting picked up by the press, or you're on site and you detect some issue, whatever it is, it's to the point where it's like, ooh, this is bad enough to where we need to talk to this supplier.
Yeah.
Well, having prescriptive deviation management, it cannot be like a lot of third-party risk management programs. This cannot be a one-size-fits-all. right? We do not want a huge blanket approach. This is a risk-based sampling exercise. So when you're talking about how do we award red or green or yellow flags, the idea is really one about symbiosis, right? So if an IT security assessment has a trigger question, can we not at some point in the earlier process get some of the answers to the things that they're going to need? Can we feed that into the other aspects? So for example, the DOJ rule is around, it's a new requirement, came out in 2025 from the current administration, that's really about transfer and access to sensitive personal information.
Yep.
So the question is, we know that there needs to be some new questions associated with this new regulation somewhere, but from an efficiency standpoint, what we're trying to do is to figure out, if you have a pre-assessment questionnaire, can we have a branch, right? You ask one question about location, that triggers the IT security assessment, and then a sub trigger for the DOJ rule. Same thing with procurement and sourcing stuff. We want an activity so that if a supplier is undergoing some sort of deviation management, right, there's an issue, that flag will detect back to the original the process of identifying a supplier for work. Because if this aspect of your company is flagging a supplier, it's not ideal for another aspect to be concurrently onboarding that supplier without having visibility into those flags.
And so often, I mean, a company doesn't even have to be that big. It can be such a challenge for the right hand to know what the left hand is doing. And I think to your point about sort of making all of this systemic, making it being very purposeful so that nobody has to worry about constantly checking, hey, is anybody having an issue with the supplier? Now, when you do reach out to suppliers, either for collaboration around something or because you need some more information, how cooperative and forthcoming do you usually find the suppliers to be?
It depends. I know this is a bad answer for your podcast, Kelly, and I'm sorry, but
no, it's the truth. We'll take it.
Okay, great. So the reality is that it super depends. It depends on a number of factors. Let's start at the top. So at the very highest level is how much does the internal stakeholder care? As you were just saying, a lot of these big complicated companies, or even some of the small ones, if it's not a business critical task of your work stream, and someone who may or may not be seen as having standing to even offer advice, much less requirements, the receptivity, I don't know the word, but how receptive that person is to those discussions is really the number one indicator of what the supplier is going to do or not do.
Yeah.
It also really matters on the ask. When you're doing supply chain mapping that is tier N, right? So you've been identified as one of our significant suppliers. It's part of our due diligence. You sort of take the Columbo angle. This is just for the boys downtown. Part of our due diligence, we need to know the sub-suppliers so that this is supply chain mapping. We want to know which of our big suppliers have a shared sub-supplier. That's an indicator of a higher risk associated with a certain supply chain. And we can't know it without your help. That's a relatively sensitive conversation because some suppliers may just have a policy. We don't share our sub-suppliers with outsiders. It grows, and we have the same thing with things like supplier code of conduct, where they're just we're responsible. We have our own supplier code of conduct, but as a policy, we're not going to sign this. So it's not really about how receptive they are, but it's about designing a program that can be flexible and accountable to the point where if you're handing off to the business or if you're asking a supplier to engage, there's some prescriptive outcome there based on the if-then statement. So if it works out and we have, then they're great. If it doesn't work out or their response is unacceptable, it sort of kicks down to a sub-decision tree that's really about the criticality of that supplier, right? So you do want to eventually have some sort of prescriptive offboarding, initiate offboarding here. But it tends to be further down the chain. And for some suppliers, that's not a viable answer. Again, back to the FDA drug pathways. When the FDA approves a drug to be marketed, part of the approval process is exactly where all this stuff comes from, the stuff that you make, the pill that you eat, where all the components come from and how they're assembled and where they're assembled, that's all part of your application. So you can't really, as a pharmaceutical company, you can't just kick those guys out.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make those moves eventually, but it has to be something very, very, very serious. That said, even for some of the lighter things, you need a well-scripted decision tree to indicate, like, is this a critical supplier? Yes, no. Will they disturb the business? Will you experience business continuity issues if this supplier goes out of business within 1 week, within 1 month?
Yeah.
That helps us set the priorities.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you talk about the decision trees, these different kinds of flags if there's an issue with a supplier, even sort of workflow considerations. Are you either using AI or experimenting with some other form of automation to make it a lighter lift for you and your team to make sure all these pieces of information get to the people that need them for the sake of making decisions?
Yeah, just like everywhere else in the business world, AI is a huge consideration at Gilead right now. I can only speak to a small part of the overall picture of how we're trying to leverage AI. We do have an AI governance risk committee, which has to sort of like look at any proposed use of AI. And we have used it in some of our risk management dimensions. It's not within my specific area, but another team does use AI risk or AI to evaluate risk associated with like SEC disclosures. You can upload a bunch of stuff and say, hey, what's the commonality here? What's one issue that is flagged as a concern or whatever it is? And it can be investment letters or whatever. Right now, the use of AI within our procurement shop is relatively young. So we do have some use cases where we're automating workflows, right? So buying at Gilead is about the tech stack, right? Some people come in through SAP Ariba. Some parts of our company aren't on SAP Ariba at all. They're on Oracle. Some of our master data connects, but there's other enhancements to the data from sub-teams that's not scripted to go back to the master data. Those are issues that really preclude the use of AI at an enterprise level, because when you and I think of a supplier, you think of the company name. Right. But when our detailed subsystems think of a supplier, we see every child subsidiary location, payment pathway, physical location. There's a lot there, some of which are spelled differently or even go by different names, some of which may or may not be detected. So what we're really thinking about is the use of AI to leverage the decision-making process. So for example, if a supplier is in fact identified as high risk, we have, the decision tree stuff that we were talking about. So right now what we're working on is a platform where, and it's in the pilot phase right now, but it'll be rolling out over the next few years. And the pilot is lifted for some critical units, right? But the idea is that instead of going through that process now with an exchange, like it sends an email to a team member who sends an email to the supplier who has to process it back. It all happens in one place now, so that if there is a gap or an assessment needed, the tool can autonomously move the workflow forward. And it tracks the sort of exchange and process owner. So it's really helpful for us to identify, like on an average cycle time, what specific element of this, and it's not just like an IT security review. Is it the contracting part? Are we waiting for the supplier? These are things that AI is really able to help us with, because once you have your logic mapped out and you can come up with a clear set of instructions, like if then sort of steps, well, then you can automate that stuff. Yeah. But to the earlier point of like, you're not starting with nothing, so start with what you have. It's been a big learning for me that as we automate, it's probably not going to replace some of the manual processes and procedures that we have deployed across some of these sub teams. What it can do, though, is to facilitate the enterprise level use of that enriched data and the decision-making process.
Yeah. Now, you referenced Colombo earlier, so I'm going to take the opportunity to say just one more thing for anybody. Like, if you know, right? This is part of the tradition here at the Sourcing Hero podcast. Dru, I'm going to give you 2 questions. You can pick either one to answer, and there's no wrong answers. So here are your options. Either what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or for the guy who's going to save the world when he grew up, what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
Ooh. Kelly, I don't want to tell you your business, but it would have been nice to have these ahead of time. Those are 2 very good questions. Can I hybrid answer? Is that allowed, Kelly?
Absolutely, it is.
Let's hybrid answer. I think for me, the idea of being a hero or moving the needle on some of these things, which are really not ultimately under my individual control. I don't have budget. I'm not a high level decision maker. If I send an email to the CEO, it's more of a problem than a thank you, right? So I think that the idea of heroism is about who you are and where you are in the enterprise. So to me, being a hero is really about, it's more than just not screwing up, right? It's about taking true advantage of the opportunities that you have and showing up in your best possible way. So when we think about what heroes do, like Superman and some of the superstars, to bring the analogy back here, Kelly, I think maybe there's also the sort of Columbo level superhero who is not disturbing the business environment. Sir, it's for the boys downtown. Just one more thing. He's got this very organized list, but he sort of shuffles through it and he looks all discombobulated. The idea is that he's putting people at ease. He's sort of like going through a very diligent process, but making it feel almost like a natural conversation. My heroism at Gilead is really nascent, right? This is year 3 for me just now, like in the last week is when I start my 3rd year here. But one of my priorities right now is to make sustainability and risk and this due diligence area that are my responsibility to be like a vegan restaurant that you don't know is vegan, which means like, ooh, that's a good dessert. Like I went through the process of selecting and onboarding the supplier in a smooth way. But the due diligence that happens sort of in the background is enhanced, right? Like in ways that didn't happen before I got here. And I think to me, that's really how I define being a hero in this specific role or within a procurement function, is making it truly, truly better, but doing so in a way that it doesn't feel like another checklist or something like that. It's not something that's tacked on.
I think that's a fantastic way of looking at it, because certainly nobody needs more friction. Nobody needs more steps. Nobody needs more red tape. And yet all of these things are incredibly important and they need to get done. So I think that's a really interesting sort of almost experiential way to think about what it looks like when somebody's in the right job. Dru, thank you so much for being with me, for sharing your experience. We've had some great fun with analogies. I'm so glad you were able to join me here on the Sourcing Hero podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Kelly. This is really great. I love the show, and I appreciate the Columbo references. If I could close with one other one that's a little Columbo trivia. This is my dad's favorite show, so I was subjected to a lot of this stuff. Did you know that the "just one more thing" line from Columbo was actually a mistake? The writers left it out of one episode. He was supposed to ask this question.
Oh, jeez.
And they left it out of the script. So instead of going back and refilming and like rewriting, they just had him go back and say one more thing and then put the question in there so the story could move forward.
Well, and for that, I will trade you back a little piece of Columbo trivia. So Lieutenant Columbo, he had a first name that was only revealed once by mistake, when somebody made a mistake and actually let him showing his badge be shown in detail. Lieutenant Columbo's first name is Frank.
Frank. I think I might have known that somewhere in the depths of my brain, but it was deep, deep.
And now it's right back up on top. Hopefully it has not replaced something absolutely critical that you needed to get through your afternoon.
Nothing's more critical than Frank Columbo.
In that, we are completely aligned. Dru, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well, and always remember that you can be a hero too.